things going whenever you're ready.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, as Nate said, thank you guys. Appreciate it. I know we were supposed to do this talk like a month or two ago, and it's just kind of been issue after issue, but fortunately, we're here tonight. So the title of the talk, does anybody recognize that? Does anybody know what that little percent T means in respect to gaming? Okay, cool. So that's actually like
Target.
Yes. Yep. UI element target. Yeah. So essentially, report player, a rapid fire talk on hacking in multiplayer games. So who am I? As Nate so nicely said, I go by Jump, Michael, whatever you want to do. I'm a DEFCON 610 moderator and board member. I'm a red team security engineer at an HPC cloud provider, and previously I was a senior security consultant doing penetration testing, security engineer in the CEM/E911 space, information security analyst in healthcare. I don't know why I didn't put it there. And I've done various amounts of other roles, everything from IT help desk to network engineering, system administration, blah, 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 right? But who else am I, right? Outside of all the professional stuff. I have way too many internet handles because I've been on the internet basically my whole life, right? So I've gone through, I think that noise is coming from outside. Maybe? Okay. Or it's coming over the speakers. Yeah, I'm not entirely too sure. Either way, we're gonna keep going. So yeah, I've got way too many handles because I've been on the internet for way too long, so I'm sure I have a ton of cringe handles from like back in the AOL Instant Messenger days that I totally don't remember, and I'm sure I have even worse from IRC boards, right? So I have a ton of internet handles, way too many to remember. I'm in the PC, console, and arcade repair and modification space, so I've been hacking consoles and arcade boards and all kinds of stuff like that. That was kind of where I cut my teeth, per se. I follow the emulation scene pretty closely, and I support the emulation scene. I'm a serious RS-232. That means I buy way too much hardware off of Reddit and off of Craigslist, and then resell it after I'm done with it. It's a problem. I acknowledge I have it. I've been a competitive video game player in a slew of fighting games, first-person shooters, and in some cases MMORPGs. So I've gone out, I've traveled, I've played at tournaments, I've played at different functions, so on and so forth. I'm a former broker of MMORPG accounts, items, gold, cheats, etc. We'll talk about that later on if anyone's interested in what that means. It kind of goes down a rabbit hole. What'd you say? Oh, that's fine. Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit. So if you're familiar with like the forums like Marquee Dragon, Player Auctions, Elite PvPers, you probably know the kind of stuff that I was doing. We can talk about it later and go into detail. EQ, Ragnarok Online, Warhammer, World of Warcraft, all those games, I'm long since removed from all of those, like the seedy dealings of them. I play Final Fantasy XIV, I play a couple of these games still, but not in any real capacity from kind of the darker side of things, right? So a quick aside, all of those things that I just mentioned got me to where I am today in one shape or form. If not for video games, I don't know where I'd be. Probably not here, probably not nearly as happy and successful as I think I am. So that's a good thing, right? Consoles and PCs and arcade modifications got me into wares and hardware hacking. The emulation scene got me into like things like virtualization and anti-piracy techniques. Flipping hardware got me into home labbing and custom firmwares and all kinds of stuff like that. Competitive gaming got me into identifying vulnerabilities and tamper identifying. And account and cheat brokering and research got me into OPSEC, social engineering, how cheats work, debugging, things like that. So it's a long rabbit hole, but rest assured that these things that start out as small hobbies can become a huge part of your life, even if, for some of the younger audience, your parents yell at you for spending way too much time playing the games.
A lot of BBSs got me into my career as a systems administrator.
100%.
I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm sure there's other stories like that in this room.
Oh yeah, 100%. If not for MMORPGs, I genuinely don't know where I'd be. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to do a really brief introduction to helpful components to know about these kind of things, right? So, and by these things, I mean game hacking and game hacking concepts. So we're going to go under just very brief, what's a Windows application? What's a process? What's an executable? What's a DLL? We're going to go over transport protocols. We'll talk about that. 10,000-foot overview. What is TCP? What is UDP? How do multiplayer games work? So obviously, I imagine all of us have played a multiplayer game of some sort. You typically play with a client that you download, and then you launch the game, and then you play, and you know that you're communicating with a server somewhere, right? So that the games can be multiplayer and on the internet. We're going to talk about cheats, anti-cheat, and security in multiplayer games. So what does cheating look like? What is a cheat? What are some of the popular types of cheats? What does anti-cheat look like? There's basically two versions of this nowadays. User mode anti-cheat, which is kind of antiquated, and kernel mode anti-cheats. In small text down there, it says one of these things is not like the other. One of these things is sketch, because I truly believe that one of them is very sketchy. There are anti-cheat bypasses that we're going to talk about, internals, externals, hardware cheats. We'll talk about what each one of those means. What can we do? And then a bonus, again, if you guys are interested in hearing about some of the brokering stuff, I can talk about what that was. If you notice any of these icons down here, it's probably because you play recent games. So there's like Easy Anti-Cheat, BattleEye, Valorant and Riot Games is Vanguard, I believe it's called. There's VAC for some of us old heads who played on Steam years and years ago, Valve's anti-cheat. Warden from the Blizzard side, and Ricochet if you played Call of Duty. So, move on. Obligatory disclaimer, information presented in these presentations are for educational purposes only and should not be used in any malicious or otherwise harmful way. The informations and opinions presented by me today are of my own opinion. They are not representative of DC 610. They're not representative of my employers, etc. I am not a subject matter expert, and I can speak only to the knowledge that I have and that I've gained over time. I'm also not a software dev slash software engineer. So some of these topics, if I get something wrong, feel free to correct me. I'm happy to make changes. This will likely be higher level than some might appreciate, or it might be a little too low or be a little esoteric, but we'll kind of go along the way. I'll do my best to cite sources and provide follow-up information. I have a ton of resources if you guys are interested in this. There are amazing content creators out there teaching people what cheats are, how they work, what we can do to kind of work against them or work with them. And I don't condone cheating or the actions discussed as parts of this presentation. Even the stuff I did in the past, I don't condone it. So,
Cheater.
Not that part. I didn't cheat. Okay, so helpful components, right? Windows applications, processes, and executables. So what is an application? An application is exactly what it sounds like or what you might be familiar with, right? If you launch Firefox on your computer or you pull up Steam, that is an application. It's something that you typically interact with at the desktop level, right? So you boot up Steam, you're launching the Steam app. In our context, a process is an instance of an application or an executable program running. So think if you load up Firefox and you have multiple tabs, or Chrome and you have multiple tabs, each one of those is opening up as a process. So just so you have an idea of what a process is. And an executable is an application that is ran and a process, or spawns a process, and it's created for that executable and it's mapped to system memory or RAM, right? So anything you launch on your computer, whether it's Chrome or Firefox or Steam, it's essentially getting a place in your computer's memory so that way you can send instructions back and forth. All right, so another helpful component for people to know might be Windows DLLs. Long story short, it's a dynamic link library. It contains code and data that can be used by more than one application at a time by the Windows operating system. So if you've ever seen like a Windows operating system prompt come up and ask you for something like, hey, do you want to install this update or something like that? Chances are it's actually a DLL that comes with the operating system. A lot of the functionality of an operating system like Windows is constructed through the use of DLLs. Helpful components, TCP, IP, and kind of what's TCP and UDP. So this is going to be really abridged. TCP and UDP are basically two protocols that you're going to use on the internet. One that is connection oriented and one that's called connectionless. Long story short, if it's TCP, it's going through checks and balances to make sure that all of the traffic, your network traffic, arrives successfully. If it is UDP, the other way, it does not always guarantee safe arrival, but for that reason, it is very fast. So it's used in games and things like that because it's very quick.
I can tell you a UDP joke, but you might not get it. Wait a second.
Client and server relationships. So as I had said before, multiplayer games typically consist of a client. That is what you're playing on, right? That's when you launch Fortnite or that's when you launch Counter-Strike. And then a server where everyone's connecting to, that everyone's sending their data up to, that's providing the calculations on whether or not your shotgun blast hit them. and you take damage, or they take damage, and so on and so forth. It facilitates a centralized instance of the game to which everyone's playing on. So that relationship is typically done through, or is fostered through inbound and outbound network packets and information being sent. It'll have information about your coordinates, like where you're standing on a map, whether or not you receive damage or get experience points or earn money or anything like that. So if you're kind of putting two and two together, a lot of times these cheats that you're going to be looking at are going to be interacting with the server in some capacity as well as your client. We talked about client and server relationships. Essentially, packets are always received in the order that they are sent by the client to the server. Otherwise, there would be issues. And you can kind of see what's going on here. This is Street Fighter V. This person, you can tell the other side is not like lagging or experiencing a very long buffer, but this person is intentionally lagging out the game so that they can land their combos without having to worry about being blocked or something like that, right? That's something called lag switching. What classifies a cheat? So cheating can take many forms, and I'll break these down a little bit. But you've got aimbots, money hacks, ESPs, you've got botting, you've got automations, you've got movement hacks, teleporting hacks, coordinate hacks, all kinds of stuff like that. Most of these typically need to read and write from the game's process memory. So as I had said, when you launch an application, it gets stored in your computer's memory. You need to have some way to change what's going on in that memory in real time. So here's a quick list of cheat examples. Is anybody familiar with any of these? You could just raise your hand and I might call on you. Okay, so people have some experience. Are there any here that people don't recognize? Which one? ESPs, cool. I was hoping somebody was going to bring that up. So ESPs are actually kind of a relatively new term if you're, I guess if you kind of haven't been in this world for like, I don't know, I'd say maybe the past 5 to 10 years. And I might screw up the terminology, but it's called extrasensory programs. So essentially what that's doing is this is the new version of like maybe back in the day what some of us old heads would have called multi-hacks, right? So this is like, it's got an aimbot in it, it's got a wall hack in it, and also if you see a character model through a wall, it's gonna tell you how much health they have, how much armor they have, what weapon they're holding, all kinds of stuff like that, right? If you've ever played a game like Escape from Tarkov, these are rampant and very valuable because in a game where if you take somebody out, you take all their equipment, you want to know ahead of time what they have so you know what you're going up against. And you could see them across the map and I know, hey, that guy's got a sniper rifle and he's got full armor and health. So I'll wait until he gets into a couple fights and then I'll go ambush him. Any other ones that people see that they aren't familiar of? I think most of them are probably pretty standard.
You reminded me of the item dupacks in Diablo 1.
Oh yeah, we can, yep.
If you were to click on that button.
Yep, absolutely, yeah. So what Nate's referring to is, and I'll see if I remember this correctly, in Diablo 1 you had the ability to, if you had an item on your person, like a valuable sword or something like that, you could drop the item on the ground, you would walk a few feet away, walk up to it, and the moment that you walked up to the item and clicked on it, if you drank a potion at the exact same time, the item would duplicate in your inventory because it would see...
You'd put items on your belt, which were like available in the main game screen.
Yep.
And you'd click on an item that was on the ground, and then as soon as your character got close enough to it, if you got the timing just right and you clicked on one of the potions on your belt, your cursor would, instead of picking up the potion, it would pick up the item that was on the ground, but the item would still be on the ground.
Yep.
So you'd have 2 copies of the same item.
Yep.
You could do that with gold, you could do it with valuable items, you could do it with potions, you could do it with worthless things, whatever.
And I can tell you that duplication of some sort or another in a lot of games like Diablo has existed and continues to exist in almost every iteration of them. There's always a duplication.
Diablo, first item you got, you'd sell it, get a couple gold for it, drop the gold on the ground, and then duplicate the gold over and over and over again until you had 50 million gold.
Yep, absolutely. And this got so rampant in some of these games that you would walk into any multiplayer lobby and you would probably just find some person off in the corner duplicating items for people.
Just walking around, you'd see him walking up to an item in the back.
And it would ruin economies in games.
Yeah.
So.
Money was worthless.
Duplication was the very first hack I ever remember doing on Pokemon Red with the missing O glitch.
Oh yeah, yep.
Yeah, the rare candy duplication.
Yep, duplicate rare candies and Master Balls.
There were trainers for Diablo 1 that would also read your character out of memory, and you could literally just put whatever you wanted on your character. You could
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so what is anti-cheat, right? You can kind of think of anti-cheat similar to like antiviruses for your computer. So the point of anti-cheat is that if the game is installed on your computer, especially in a multiplayer game, people are going to want to make sure that that game is not tampered with, so that that way it's fair across the board for everybody. Anti-cheat enforces and comes up with different ways to go about that enforcement to make sure that people aren't hacking, right? So it's looking for things like network behavior. It's looking for whether or not you're running a modified version of the game that doesn't meet the standard version of the game that everyone else is running. It looks for things like, hey, did your character travel really, really fast in a way that they shouldn't be? Maybe that's indicative of speed hacking. All these different things that they do are essentially to try and solve the issue of people hacking, right? They often utilize both what I was describing before as that inbound traffic and that outbound network traffic to try and determine whether or not you're using like a hacked client or a trainer, as you had mentioned earlier. That's a bit of an old school term, but a trainer, yep.
As though this thing was supposed to help you learn to play the game or something.
Yeah, exactly.
It was a cheat.
No.
It was 100% a cheat.
It was 100% a cheat. Yeah, absolutely. They're also, just like antivirus, they're composed of a lot of different types of checks. So like heuristic checks, pattern matching, logic checks, all kinds of things like that. So an example of an anti-cheat check might be like a logic check where it's comparing the behavior of inbound and outbound packets and trying to figure out if that looks normal compared to somebody else's traffic, right? Something to keep in mind is that a lot of these games, they're so large that all of these calls and things like that back and forth to the server end up getting stored in a database somewhere. And you can bet that they're running checks on that database to see which ones look like anomalies. And then going back on that to find out, hey, who was the person whose anomaly got flagged? What's their IP address? What's their game hash? What's all that type of stuff? You have heuristic checks to make sure that things are humanly possible. So again, are you moving way faster than you should be? Are you pressing the trigger button 100 times in a second, whereas like maybe the best player on the server can do 12? They're gonna wanna know about that. They're not 100% foolproof or accurate because you have ways of doing those things without necessarily hacking. I'm sure everyone has played a game where they've randomly fallen through the world because there's just a janky texture. That's gonna cause an impossible travel, but if it's like a one-off situation every now and then, it's probably not gonna get flagged. There's two types of anti-cheat primarily. I'm sure that there are others. There is a user mode anti-cheat and there is a kernel mode anti-cheat. User mode is a little bit of an old kind of solved problem for hackers. Kernel mode is the new stuff that's coming out. So when you install Valorant or when you install Call of Duty, they're coming up with new anti-cheat methods that specifically leverage certain functionality that is not capable to be done in user mode. And we'll talk about that a little bit. So
correct me if I'm wrong here, but a user mode application runs as a user. Oh, you're going to talk about this?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll talk about it. Okay.
Yeah, so you have user mode anti-cheats, right? This is where it runs as an application, right? This is like if you've played some games before, you might see you launch the game and then all of a sudden another window comes up and it says like, oh, I don't know, easy anti-cheat is loading, or like nprotect anti-cheat is loading. That's the anti-cheat running in the background of your computer. It's not hooked into the game in the same way. It's doing the same thing that like an antivirus is doing. It's looking at memory, it has access to all that, and it's looking for things that are trying to interact with the game that you launched, right? So it has lower privileges over the computer as a whole. So basically what that means is it doesn't have the ability to look into files, functions, things like that, that maybe a higher privileged application would have.
And it's a process that you as a user ran.
Correct.
Even though you didn't run it, it ran automatically as you, which means you have rights over the process.
Correct, yes. You can kill the process. It'll probably take the game down with it, but yes, you typically have access to interact with the process.
Its execution, its memory, the files it accesses, they're all accessible by you as the user.
Correct. Yep. And it's not like in Windows. It's not gonna launch as like a service account with super high priorities or anything like that, right? It's gonna run as the user that launched it.
And this is also like it doesn't have to be an anti-cheat application.
Nope.
This is how services run on your web servers.
Yep.
Right. So this is.
This is you launching Steam. This is you launching EA Games Launcher, whatever theirs is called, any of those sort of things. So essentially, they perform various actions such as integrity checks and things like that, making sure that there's not unsupported files as part of the game package and things like that. Make sure you're not hacking the client to get past their anti-cheat. They do signature detection just like an antivirus. So if it notices that you're doing something or you've injected something into the application that doesn't pass one of their signatures, it says, hey, get out of here, you're doing the wrong thing. They hook into Windows APIs that are commonly leveraged to cheat, such as like load library APIs, open process, things like that. Kernel mode anti-cheat is a little different. It installs onto your computer like a driver, and it has access to ring 0 functions. This is why kernel level anti-cheat is kind of seen as a hate-love relationship within the gaming industry right now, is because number one, it does a really good job of doing anti-cheat, but theoretically it's also giving the anti-cheat vendor full access to your machine in a very high privileged way, right? There is a lot of secondary controls to make sure that that does not go awry, but that doesn't mean that something can't be done to exploit the anti-cheat to give a potential bad actor ring 0 access to a system, right? So it does everything that the old school userland anti-cheats do. It can do all of the same heuristic, logic checks, all of that, but it has additional functionality as well. It can completely hacking because it has such high access over the memory space to which the application was loaded. So just as an example, you might try to load an application that kind of side loads or shoehorns a cheat into an old school game, right? Like a trainer, for example. It's accessing memory space and it's just rewriting the memory space to include what you wanted. I want this item, okay? We find out where in the memory we put that item, put it in the memory. Hey, it shows up in your game. Cool, you have the item. That's a lot harder with kernel level anti-cheat because of how strict the security controls are. It sends any action that it does as a notification to the driver, and essentially from there, it handles injecting DLLs, side-loading DLLs, anything like that. In order to bypass these things, you basically have to kind of write your own anti-cheat. You have to write your own driver. If you don't come with a driver, you don't have the same privilege level. And I'm sure if anybody here has done privilege escalation techniques and things like that, you do get to a point where there are some things that you're going to want to do, but you're going to need the same privileges as another account, even if it's an account adjacent.
This basically means that your anti-cheat has more access to your computer than you do.
A ton more, yes.
Which is kind of crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this is a thing that came along with the game you just bought.
Correct, yeah. So, and this is definitely one of those things where you do start to wonder how invasive it is, and because it loads as a driver, you're not going to be able to just pull up Task Manager and see what processes it's running. You're not going to be able to see any of that. It's all hidden. It's completely blind to the average user. Or I should say the average user is completely blind to it in most cases.
And there's another problem with kernel level anti-cheat. With Steam Deck having been very successful over the past couple of years, the Steam Deck is essentially running Linux.
Yep.
And it's leaning on Proton, which, for those of you who aren't familiar with what Proton is, it's basically an emulation of the Windows drivers and whatnot, so that you can run Windows software on a Linux-based machine. There is no kernel that a kernel level Windows driver can deal with, because it's really running on a Linux kernel.
Yep.
So, for instance, on my Steam Deck, I can play Fortnite, which I'm okay with, by the way. But
Or Rust.
PUBG,
Right? We tried playing Rust.
multiplayer Rust, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
You can't join public servers.
as a Linux, as a guy who now games on Linux, except for stuff on my PS5, kernel level anti-cheats are actually a great way to ensure I'm not going to buy your game.
Yep, absolutely. Because I mean, in user mode, kind of as it was back in the day, one of the ways to go about hacking user mode with anti-cheats was just to spin up a VM. Just spin up a VM, run the machine, or I'm sorry, run the game on your VM, and now if anything happens to it, you have external control to that VM from your actual PC. So getting, being able to attach a debugger or do something like that so that you can access memory is a lot easier in that case. Nowadays, that's not the case. If you don't have a Windows kernel, you don't play. That's pretty much what it comes down to. Even if you're using Proton as like I shouldn't call it an emulation layer, there's a better word for it. But essentially, yeah, it's not emulating an entire, Windows kernel. You're essentially dealing with the fact that there's going to be a lot of things that you're locked out of because of your choice of operating system, right? Even if Valve says, hey, this game is Steam verified, they might not mean multiplayer, which is, kind of sad.
But to be clear, it's the right choice of operating system.
We can talk about Copilot later, but okay, but I know that guy was cheating.
He means Linux is the right choice.
No, I know, and I was just kind of pivoting off the fact of like, yeah, Copilot might be the thing that, year of the Linux desktop 2024 because Copilot, but.
Finally pushes you over.
I saw a great meme that said they wanted to congratulate Satya Nadella as the new marketing director for Apple.
It's not a lie. All right, but I know that guy was hacking. I know he was cheating. There's no way he hit me with that shot. I saw him fly through the wall. It's a kernel level anti-cheat game. If people pay attention to games like Apex Legends, we obviously saw that there's been a lot of hacks developed for Apex Legends, Counter-Strike 2 as well, a lot of these games that have kernel level anti-cheats. So people are getting cheats on them, right? Hackers are gonna hack. Welcome to bypasses, right? You have 3 primary bypass types currently. You have what's called an internal, an external, and a hardware cheat. Yes, a hardware cheat. These are things that largely go undetected. They are here, and people pay a lot of good money for them. Because a lot of competitive gaming and things like that can be done out of the internet. So you don't have to worry about, hey, I have a totally different computer with my mouse plugged into that, accepting inputs and outputs and things like that. Nobody's going to see me cheat. So
This reminds me of back in the Nintendo Entertainment System days. We're going back 30 to 40 years here. But there was a controller you could buy that had the normal A and B buttons and then a turbo A and B button.
yeah, yep.
That would just like spam the A button, spam the B buttons, right? That's a hardware hack.
It is.
You think about it, right? That wasn't released by Nintendo.
No.
They didn't want players to have it, but you
What
could
was
buy it.
that? Josh, you would know this stuff. Weren't there a whole line of things that you could like plug the cartridge
Yeah,
into?
to replay game code,
And then
that kind
plug
of stuff.
Oh, like the
Yep, Game Genie.
That's what
Yep.
you're talking about. Game Shark, Game Genie, yeah.
Oh yeah, there's a ton of
My
them.
son is my expert on pretty much the entire Nintendo handheld lineup.
There you go. Yeah, that still exists, and I mean, in the Super Nintendo, we had ROM dumpers, right? You plug a cartridge into a ROM dumper and dump the entire cartridge, and replay that on a backed up floppy drive. There's always ways. So bypasses, right? So this is how am I going to get around the anti-cheat? Internals are loaded directly into the game's process, and they have complete access to that process's memory for the ability to inject cheats, right? We had said that you need to get a cheat into memory in order for the game to recognize it. So we have to be able to inject into memory. They require an injector, which takes a DLL, whether it's malicious or comes packaged by Windows, into the game's memory space. The anti-cheat will iterate over a list of all those loaded modules, and if there's one that's not supposed to be there, it knows the game is tampered with, and it kicks you out. But if you can latch onto a module that it knows is supposed to be there, and it's only doing a check of, hey, is blah, blah, blah.dll here? Yes, you're good to go, proceed. It might not catch you. We already talked a little bit about how anti-cheats can kind of use like load library functions to block all the injections. However, there's legitimate reasons to have injections in your game. If you play Fortnite or if you play Call of Duty and you play on Discord, there's a good possibility that you might have a little Discord overlay that shows up in the middle of your game that allows you to chat with your friends or see when your friends are chatting and things. That is an injection because they need to be able to inject their overlay into the game, right? This might be for game recordings too. If you want to record your game, if you use like NVIDIA Shadow Play or whatever it was called for so long, that needs to be able to prompt a dialog box for you to record. So there has to be a way to inject on that. And a lot of those get vetted by the software developers and things like that, but nothing's saying that you can't break one of those things and hop your way into the actual game. You could do manual mapping, which gets a little bit esoteric. We're not going to go into that too much, so we'll skip over that. Externals are essentially ways to access the game memory from your own process. This is a lot more difficult because essentially now you're not in the game. Your cheat is running like another application on the side of the game. So you use your read and write ability to memory functions within Windows to inject malicious actions. It can be easily identified, however, sometimes depending on how you go about it, and with user mode anti-cheat, it's less easy to detect. So external bypasses, it's pretty few and far in between. You have hardware bypasses now, and this is what I was talking about, where there's actually a lot of really cool articles, if you follow like the esports space, about people getting caught with this, where essentially what they're doing is they're doing direct memory access through another device, like an Arduino, a Raspberry Pi, or something like that, plugged into the computer. So they're taking the read and write operations that are passing through memory through to the CPU, and it's passing it off to the other device so that the other device can read those, manipulate them, and send them back over the same bus where it's accepted as being acceptable, right? It's going through PCI Express, and then it's going up into memory, and hey, everything looks normal here. There's totally not another machine intercepting everything. So you need like a DMA facilitator, like an Arduino with a USB to PCI adapter. Basically, the way that it looks to the game is that 0 cheats are running. Because on the computer, yeah, there's no cheats running. There's just a device that's passing information through to the CPU or passing information through to RAM, but computers do that every day all the time. There's no reason to be suspectful of this process. But people are then using that as ways to find a way into memory space. These devices are not cheap. These devices are very sought after, and people have been caught with them, but they're getting harder to detect online, which makes competitive gaming a little difficult because we used to all meet up and play at LAN centers and things like that when we competed professionally. Now we're doing a lot of that online with online tournaments and things like that. And if you can get past the game's anti-cheat, the people at, I don't know, whatever esports league, right? MLG, ESL, StarLadder, whomever, as long as you pass the anti-cheat, they're like, yeah, we can't do anything about that. We can't have you run a client on your machine that's running additional anti-cheat. Maybe that comes down the road, but for now, they rely on the game's anti-cheat engine. So that was pretty long-winded, but does anybody have any questions?
You might want to record this. So do you think that cheating is good?
No, I don't. Well, let me rephrase. I think doing research into finding cheats, and I think make no mistake, the people who actually develop the cheats, not the people that download them and use them, right? Because if you download and you use something, it's less impressive. But the people who come up with these things, this is incredibly difficult research, and I would be willing to bet that most of the people who develop full-on cheat engines in today's arena are probably better at reverse engineering than most software engineers, if not maybe even the highest echelon of some software engineers. Reverse engineering a kernel-level anti-cheat and things like that is incredibly difficult. This is not, a kid playing around who finds, hey, I can change a hex address, and all of a sudden I can, get access to a bunch of free things. No, this is like, I'm hooking DLLs, I'm trying to inject into memory, I'm trying to pull instructions out of memory, rewrite, execute back up, pass a server check, pass a validation, do all of these things. This is tough stuff. So I give a lot of credit to the people who research these things, and my hope would be that they report it. But people who use these in online environments just to kind of like peeve people off or cause problems, it's not all that cool in reality. Just kind of is what it is, right? But good question. Any other questions?
How much money do you think there is in the cheating industry, let's call it? is it mostly the egos of nerds, or like these
No.
people doing this very difficult work? There's got to be some sort of financial gain for most of them.
We can talk about that. I can talk about that at length when we go into the next section. However, no. And you can look into cases of things like way back in the day, there was a World of Warcraft bot written called Glider. People might be familiar with that term. The individual who wrote Glider actually showed up to a DEFCON talk. I think he's done a few of them, honestly. When he got sued by Blizzard, it was because the amount of money that he was making per month on his cheat engine and his bot engine was an incredible amount of money. He was making a ton of money, and that's only scaled tenfold nowadays. I would say that if I had to guess, it's probably $1 billion industry, if not more, truthfully.
Yeah, what about like these games where we now have in-game currency that can be exchanged for in-game currency and exchanged out for real currency?
So a lot of that, I'm not going to say for certain because I don't work at those companies, but in my opinion, I think the reason why we have a lot of that, right? Like, I hate to use this example a ton. It's just it's the game that I played a lot was World of Warcraft. So World of Warcraft has like the WoW token you can buy.
Yeah.
You pay real money for that, and you can sell it for in-game gold, or you could sell it for game time. I think that that was a direct response to how rampant the market went with real money transactions in these games. People essentially either botting or doing something like that and buying gold, buying items to make themselves more powerful. So yeah, I think that's a direct response to that.
Games like Second Life, for example,
Yeah.
where you could earn Linden dollars, I think they were called, in game, or you could buy Linden dollars.
Yep.
But you could also change them back out for actual currency, and people were literally making money by crafting items.
Oh yeah.
And selling them in game.
Yeah, absolutely. When Diablo 3.
Diablo 3 had the real money auction house.
Yeah, that was a big one, right?
I think they made $1.50.
I made
But I didn't
not
use
much.
it very often.
I made not very much. I think I made like a couple $100 off of the Diablo 3
I sold an
marketplace.
item for giggles, but I just never really.
But like, admittingly, I was also the same person who went out. I bought Blizzard had like gift cards or something at some point, and I went out and I bought a $50 gift card, and I bought items off the real money auction house because I leveled up a character and didn't want to grind for another 60 hours to get the items that I needed, so that I could farm the items I could sell later on for real money. So I did a little bit of a rob Peter to pay Paul there. But yeah.
Money doing your normal job, and then like it's cost effective for people like us who get the big bucks at work to pay some kid to farm gold.
I have definitely turned my grown-up money into accelerated time in video games at times.
Yeah, it's
Legally.
right. Yeah.
You do that.
But
Yeah, and there's a bit of a give and take to that, and that's definitely like a really hot topic as to, do we want to be exchanging real money for virtual things and so on and so forth. I'm kind of on the fence on it. I've done it. I've been on the other side of it, etc.
If the virtual things produce real joy and dopamine hits, I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah.
Because this beer no longer exists, but was delicious and will cost me real money.
But to caveat that, what happens when it becomes and we can move this into a different conversation, but what happens when it becomes like it becomes such a fixation for a person that they begin to do personal harm to themselves by trying to get that dopamine hit constantly, right? You hear about the people who rake up thousands of dollars of credit card debt.
Like using his beer example,
Yeah.
like that's a very real problem that people have.
Oh, yeah.
They spend money on the beer to get the dopamine hit or to get the whatever, the effect of the beer.
You're
right?
talking about a human characteristic that goes way beyond.
Oh yeah, it's the gambling problem, right? It's the loop.
Maybe one day we'll figure that.
Yeah, no, for sure. But all right, any other questions that anybody wants recorded?
thank you.
Nope. Okay, awesome. Thanks, guys.